What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we never finished like Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight run, so we're gonna finish it here. So to kind of get you guys caught up on what's happening, and we'll make this super short. In effect, Mark Spector had just woken up in a mental institution, and that was it. He didn't really know how he got there. He simply just knew that he was there. But over the course of the first 2 volumes, there were a couple things that happened. One, the Egyptian goddess Ammit had appeared, basically replacing somebody named Dr. Emmett, and we'll talk about her here in a minute. But the other thing that had gone on is Mark had realized none of what was happening was real, that it was all basically in his own mind. More so than that, he came to the realization that in order for him to basically heal himself, he couldn't keep ignoring the personalities of Jake Lockley and Steve Grant, that he actually had to embrace them. And so what he ended up doing was literally unifying those personalities and then talking with those personalities and letting them become a part of him. So it doesn't mean they're gone. It doesn't mean that like they've somehow merged into a singular Mark Spector who's now whole and doesn't have any split personalities. They're still there, but basically they're kind of a cohesive team, right? Like a multiple personality team, if that makes any sense. But the thing about this, and what's really cool here, is in this final part, Jeff Lemire did a lot of changing to the Mark Spector mythos. And this comes by way of his youth, that when he was younger, the way the story opens up, when he was younger, he's just a little kid who's playing in his neighborhood, you know, chalk drawings, all that kind of stuff, which is cool. And he's met by the arrival of another younger kid. And as the two of them start talking, Mark introduces himself and reveals that he lives in this apartment building, and the kid says, "I know." And as they start exchanging names, the other kid says, "My name is Stephen Grant." And so what this means, this is a huge development here, because what this means is that the personality of Steve Grant and Jake Lockley had always been a part of Mark Spector's mind. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is because back in the day in Marvel Comics, when it came to the Moon Knight mythos, initially Marvel pitched Mark Spector as a guy with schizophrenia, that he couldn't distinguish between reality and fantasy. The old Doug Moench stories focused heavily on that. So you didn't know if he was actually the fist of an Egyptian god, basically Khonshu's weapon on Earth designed to take vengeance on people out there, or if he was a schizophrenic who had made it all up. Over the years, Marvel has of course changed that up to where instead of Mark Spector having schizophrenia, he had dissociative identity disorder. Basically, he had created the persona of Jake Lockley to allow him to keep his ear to the ground in order to know what kind of crime was going on throughout parts of New York that he simply didn't know about. But he also created the Steve Grant persona as the billionaire personality that would allow him to monitor white-collar crime and then fund his efforts as Moon Knight. What Marvel did is they said that over the course of his time as Moon Knight, having the Jake Lockley and the Steve Grant personas, Mark Spector got lost in them, to where he basically forgot that he made them up, and he started believing that he was Steve Grant, or started believing he was Jake Lockley, and didn't know which one was actually him. What Jeff Lemire is doing here is basically cleaning all that up and saying, no, they weren't personalities that he created. They were personalities that were always there, right? They had been there ever since he was a little kid. And this comes to a head as he's having this conversation with Steve Grant and showing him around his room, that when his dad walks in and he's like, "Mark, who are you talking to?" Mark's like, "I'm just talking to my new friend, Steven." And that's when his dad starts to realize, okay, there's something seriously off here. Now, what I want to do is I want to kind of focus on this bit of an origin for a second and then jump back into the main thick of things, because Jeff Lemire jumps back and forth, and it can be really difficult to keep up with for people who don't really read comics at all. And so what this origin does is it basically continues on with Mark's father taking him to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I think it's a psychiatrist, whichever one has like a medical degree and can administer medication and things like that. But as they're having a conversation, while we don't necessarily see the Jake Lockley persona manifest when Mark Spector is a little kid, his father reveals that Jake is one of the personalities, that he's actually talked to Jake before. And so of course the doctor ends up asking Mark to leave the room while he talks to his father. And while Mark's overhearing things, that's when he starts hearing these things about like dissociative identity disorder and like, you know, therapy simply won't help. There needs to be like more aggressive treatment, medication, being put in an institution, things like that. But while that's happening, this is where Khonshu begins to target Mark, because as this is going on, Khonshu speaks to Mark and says like, "That guy is not your true father. I'm your true father. And in time, you will come to me." Now, The cool thing about this is Jeff Lemire actually borrowing from the X-Men comics, which is a great concept. So what Chris Claremont did is he wrote a story in Bizarre Adventures issue number 27. And what this established is that when Jean Grey was a little girl, that her friend Annie died. And that in that moment, she let out a kind of psychic backlash or psychic feedback into the universe. And that Xavier picked up on it, which is how he found Jean in the first place, but the Phoenix Force detected it as well. And that over the course of Jean Grey's life, the Phoenix watched her. And in fact, there is a story called the what is it, X-Men, the Lost Years or something like that, or like X-Men, like the Lost Adventures of the X-Men. It's something along those lines. I can't remember. It's been so long since I read it. But basically, there's one point where Jean Grey's traveling with the Fantastic Four, and she's temporarily possessed by the Phoenix. And so basically, it had been watching her over the course of her life, so that when the Phoenix saga kicked off, it was basically a long-awaited union between Jean and the Phoenix Force. That's what Jeff Lemire's borrowing from here. That ever since Mark Spector was a little kid, he was targeted by Khonshu. Now, the reason why Khonshu targeted him will become relevant very, very soon, because what we end up doing here is basically switching over to a point where Mark Spector is basically allowed to go to his father's funeral. Now, one of the people here is a woman named Dr. Emmett, and this is the reason why Emmett appeared as Emmett in basically the mindscape of Mark Spector, because one, it was a familiar face, a person he had already known, so most likely he would believe the illusion he was seeing if he was surrounded by people that he already knew. And with his mind being so broken already, Mark Spector would likely just roll with it because it's just one of the things that happens when you're him. And so as a result of that, it's kind of this brief little moment, but that's why Emmett appears as Emmett in this story. But once Mark, of course, gets to the funeral, he's basically talking to his mom, and he talks about how, like, he believed his dad was happy to be rid of him. He believed his dad was just happy to see him gone, that he was always embarrassed by the fact that Mark had dissociative identity disorder. And in fact, there's one point, whether or not it's actually happening or he's joking around, he's talking to his mom and he's just like, Mark's not here anymore, right? Like basically, I'm here now, right? Basically, Jake Lockley is the one who took over this because Mark's too upset to handle what comes next. Again, we're not really sure that's what's actually happening or whatever the case is. When he goes to visit his bedroom, because of just the sheer amount of weight and even anger and guilt that he feels, he ends up seeing the moon and he hears the voice of Khonshu, which beckons him. And so he ends up taking off. And then following that, he enlists in the Marines. But one of the things that goes on and what Jeff Lemire says is that over the course of this time in Mark Spector's life, Khonshu was always reaching out to him. He was always talking to him. He was always kind of manipulating him and telling him, like, you're just one step closer, right? You're almost here. Soon we will be together, like that kind of a thing. And there even comes a point when he's in the Marines when he's kind of hypnotized by talking with Khonshu and ends up walking out into a minefield. And when he comes to, of course, he's brought to a superior who basically reveals that he knows Mark has basically spent time in a mental institution. And the reality here is that with Mark having these episodes where he seemingly blacks out, that he can't be in the Marines. Because of the fact that he lied to his recruiters, he's dishonorably discharged. And it makes sense to a degree, right? I mean, if these are the kind of episodes he's having, he could very well just like walk into some kind of a roadside bomb or end up just, leading his team or leading his group into some kind of hostile situation and get people killed. His mental faculties cannot be trusted. And while I've never been a military man, I do have to believe that in the military, you have to be able to trust the mental faculties of the person next to you if for no other reason to ensure that you don't get each other killed. And so as a result of him basically getting the boot, he does the only thing he can do, which is turn to what is in effect mercenary work. Now, initially, it's just like an underground fighting ring to a degree, but that's when he meets Frenchie. And between him and Frenchie, they end up going into what's basically bounty hunter / mercenary work, where using their experiences, they start rounding people up. One of the first people they end up catching is basically a guy called the Wolf, who's basically a guy who runs drugs, right? Who creates heroin and so on and so forth. And they basically snatch him up and they end up taking him away to the guy that had a contract to get the Wolf. And of course, this man who put the contract out turns out to be none other than Raul Bushman. Of course, Raul Bushman basically being the mercenary that works with Mark Spector, where they end up meeting like the archaeologist and Marlene, and then Raul Bushman betrays them all. He shoots Mark Spector, leaves him for dead, and then Mark Spector finally becomes a host of Khonshu. What's important about this, and the reason why this matters so much, and why Khonshu had targeted Mark ever since he was a little kid, is because the goal of Khonshu was to basically destroy Mark Spector's mind. That his mind was already fractured. It was already broken. So it was like a glass that was partially cracked. All you had to do was just flick it a few times, and the whole thing's gonna shatter. And that's exactly what Khonshu wanted to do with Mark Spector. The reason being because once Mark Spector's mind is completely and totally broken, he becomes an empty vessel. And what it does is it basically basically allows Khonshu to take over the body of Mark Spector because there is no mental resistance, right? As long as Mark Spector's consciousness is in there, as long as he's in control of his faculties and his mind is aware, he can fight off the influence of Khonshu. But if there is nothing more than a broken mind that would be in what you or I would call a mental vegetative state, then it just is literally like just leaving the door open in a house. All Khonshu has to do is just walk in, and then he would basically be a god on earth, right? So again, realizing that was the case and realizing that's what's going on, what it does is it circles back to everything happening in the mindscape of Mark Spector. Basically, his attempt to fight against Khonshu, because he realizes that's what's going on here. That Khonshu is basically manipulating him, and Khonshu is trying to use his broken mind as a means to enter into the real world. And so what this does is it basically leads to him kind of traveling back to, again, this kind of diner in this mindscape, which is led by a woman named Gina, again, kind of a mental assistant of sorts. It's one of those mental aspects that keeps him anchored to him not losing himself inside of his own mind. But as he travels back directly to what's essentially Anubis, that Anubis is in possession of Crawley. And of course, Mark Spector wants to get Crawley back and then ultimately face off against Khonshu and destroy Khonshu, thereby righting all the wrongs as he sees it. But with Anubis in possession of Crawley, the response of Anubis is no. Like, I'm not going to give you Crawley back. He belongs to me now. I'm taking him to what is in effect the underworld, right? The afterlife, that kind of a thing. And so Mark Spector basically tries to broker a deal between the two. And ultimately Anubis does. Anubis says, okay, fine. If what you want is Crawley, you need to bring me something. Travel to the Overvoid, find the thing that I want and bring it back here. You'll know it when you see it. And of course, Mark Spector ends up traveling to the Overvoid. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, the Overvoid is the realm specifically where the Egyptian gods reside. In Marvel Comics, you have all different kinds of realms where different people basically spend time. When it comes to the Egyptian gods, because their mythos is so closely intertwined, they really just kind of occupy in a singular place, right? That the Egyptian gods were all basically created by Amun-Ra, also known as the Demiurge, and that in turn, Amun-Ra fathered all these different gods that you see here. So the old gods versus the new gods is kind of what we're talking about. The Egyptian godly mythos is starkly different from something like the Greek gods, right? They exist in Olympus, where then you have the gods of like Odin and those guys who basically hang out in Asgard, right? And then you've got like Vishnu and you've got all those places. They all have their own individual realms. It doesn't mean they can't meet. And in fact, Amun-Ra is a member of the Council of Godheads. So when like Odin and Zeus and Vishnu and Amun-Ra and all these guys meet because something huge is popping off, like the Infinity Gauntlet story from back in the 90s, they'll all meet in a central location, but they all go back to their quote-unquote godly realms, right? Their homes. And so that's really what the Overvoid is. Now, of course, Mark Spector getting in here is immediately attacked by different henchmen and whatnot, and is ultimately taken by these forces of the Overvoid, which seem to have taken control. But when he's put in this prison, that's when he's basically met by Anput, who is essentially the love interest of Anubis. And that's when he realizes this is what Anubis wants. So my job here is to basically free Anput, I think is how you pronounce that, and then take her back to Anubis, right? And in that way I can get Crawley and then we can move on from there. And so the funny thing about this is that as all this goes down, Mark is immediately taken by one of these henchmen essentially, and then brought for sacrifice. And he is actually gonna be killed, right? Like literally they intend to kill him. Now, technically again, this is all kind of happening inside of his own mind, but his spirit is basically in this realm, right? This portion of his mind is in this realm. So imagine if, for example, your consciousness could leave your body and travel to an ethereal realm. What do you think would happen if your consciousness was destroyed? That consciousness, that personality wouldn't be able to come back. And so because of the fact that what you have here is basically Mark Spector, who has essentially become the ruler of his own body, that like the Moon Knight personality and the Steve Grant personality and the Jake Lockley personalities no longer have control over his own body, this would be the final step. And so if he's killed here in the Overvoid, then there is no one to house the body of Mark Spector, which means Khonshu can take it over. So while Khonshu isn't necessarily the one directing Mark to the Overvoid, it really is Anubis. At the end of the day, Khonshu's goal could still be achieved here. And so of course, in the middle of all this, you end up having the the other personalities of Mark Spector that jump in and effectively save the day. And so again, in his own mind, experiencing all this, his personality basically transitioning to the Overvoid, the Moon Knight personality travels to the Overvoid as well, along with the Steve Grant personality doing the exact same thing. Now, of course, Steve Grant's there more to like free input than anything else because the guy can't fight. He can't fight at all. He even says that. Good job, Steve Grant. You got input. And he's like, yeah, cool, you know. I usually leave the fighting up to you guys. You know, I'm more of just, I'm the money. Right? Like I'm the financier, the benefactor, you know, that kind of a thing. But again, like as they're surrounded, they're ultimately rescued by what looks like Jake Lockley in a spaceship. So that's cool. Obviously, when things go on inside your own head, things tend to go off the rails. But with all these personalities basically working together, that in turn essentially allows them to transition back to the realm of Anubis. And in bringing input to Anubis, at that point, Crawley is freed. Now, what this does here is it basically leads to Mark essentially reconciling with Jake Lockley and Steve Grant and the Moon Knight persona. Now, something I also want to specify here, in the comics, Moon Knight is his own personality, right? He's not the guy that Mark Spector dresses up as, right? He really is his own personality. So imagine that when Bruce Wayne, when he becomes Batman, he's like a totally different personality. He knows the kind of stuff that Bruce Wayne does, but he's like a wholly different person. It's not just Bruce Wayne putting on a mask and beating up criminals in the middle of the night. That's not really what this is, right? So that's one of the things I want to specify here that I think is incredibly important because I feel like people seeing Moon Knight there is going to throw them off. Yeah, so Moon Knight is his own guy. But following that, of course, what they basically say is because of the conversation that we had before, you are the prime personality, Mark Spector, right? Like when you were born, your parents named you Mark Spector. You are the main personality here. We're backups, right? We're backup singers. And because this is your story, this is your body, we're here if you need us, but this is a fight that you have to fight on your own against Khonshu, right? You are the one that he seeks control of. You're the one that he seeks to destroy. You have to be the one to defeat him in order to fix yourself. And so basically with Crawley being freed, at that point, he goes and starts tracking down Khonshu. Now, this is a really, really cool thing because what happens in this conversation, he basically says, like, let this power come through you, Mark. Like, basically merge with me, right? Let my power become your power. Now, what he's secretly trying to do here is he's trying to trick Mark. He's trying to dupe him. If Mark buys in to what it is that Khonshu is saying, this is him basically letting Khonshu take over his body. That's essentially what it would be. That ultimately he's like, no, that's not gonna happen, right? Like I came here to quite literally kill you. Now he does what he can, but at the end of the day, he's fighting against a god inside of his own mind. And that ultimately, this is Mark Spector kind of at his most, or not really seeing himself as he should. So to give you guys perspective here, what this is, and I know this is gonna sound a little crazy, but bear with me here because I know all of you guys have experienced this. Have you guys experienced that kind of thing? Like maybe it's some measure of a lack of self-confidence, right? Or you're not as sure of yourself as you should be. And so you have that voice in the back of your head that constantly tells you like, you can't achieve that. You can't do that. There's no way that's going to work. You are going to fail, right? That voice in the back of your head that doubts you all the time, that's your subconscious speaking from its interpretation of your life experiences. Doesn't mean that interpretation's right, but that's what your subconscious is doing. What this is it's basically your subconscious trying to drag you down to what it knows, whereas you are trying to break free of these chains your subconscious has around you and trying to trick you into believing that you're not worth a damn. This is what Mark Spector is experiencing right now. Not necessarily confidence, but in the sense that he's always been kind of a passenger in his own life in a lot of ways. That sure, when he was a mercenary, he kind of did his own thing, but the reality here is that he sees himself as broken. So he believes he's broken. He believes that he can't overcome the power of Khonshu because he doesn't think he can. And what's going on here is him coming to terms with the fact that in his own mind, it's not Khonshu that's God, it's him. He controls everything. There is nothing inside of his world in his own mind that happens without him allowing it. And so if Khonshu were to destroy him in his own mind, it's because he just sat down and gave up. Whereas what should be happening here, a man of stature, a man of confidence, Khonshu becomes a virtually useless thing. And that's exactly what starts to happen here. That as Khonshu intimidates him, as he taunts him, as he kind of gives him a hard time, Khonshu says, you are here, the place where all roads lead. This place will be your tomb, Mark. So I have one question, my son. Are you ready? And the response of Mark finally coming into his own and finally recognizing that Khonshu inside of Mark's own mind is only as powerful as Mark allows him to be. That he says, that's not the question, Khonshu. The question is, are you? And as the two of them meet each other, Khonshu starts screwing with his head, right? He literally starts using all these past experiences, all these mistakes that Mark believes he's made over the course of his life. And that really is the weapon of your subconscious, right? If your subconscious were like your mortal enemy, which I would argue, depending on your life experiences, it can be, its weapon is regret. Its weapon is fear, and its weapon is self-doubt. Every mistake you've made over the course of your life, everything that you believe that you've done wrong over the course of your life, your subconscious will use that as a weapon. It's its sword, its mace, its axe. It's what it uses to chop you down. And so as long as you can maintain that personal armor, your subconscious can't do anything to you. And that's exactly what Mark is going through right here. That he's starting to realize, again, Khonshu's only as powerful as he allows him to be, right? He's only that capable. And so one of the things that you basically end up finding out here is that what's actually happening here in the real world is that Mark is being broken down to a degree by ANAD, right? That he's basically being literally held in place. And so what goes on here, and what's really, really interesting, is you get this kind of explanation here, right? To a bit of a degree, right? This sort of explanation from Khonshu. And this is where people talk about the nature of Khonshu in relation to the Moon Knight mythos, that when Mark Spector was left for dead by Raoul Bushman, and he was placed before the statue of Khonshu, that Khonshu had readily admitted, I have always watched you, Mark. I have been watching you for a long time. He says, this is a flashback, Mark. It is being intercut with the present. And he says, the past and the present intermingle. They blend together and become one, just like different aspects of your broken mind. I will rid you of yourself. I will hollow you out and make you my perfect vessel. And he says, this means little here. The moment of your birth is here and there. It is then and now. All times lead to this instant. What's going on here is that where Khonshu inside the mindscape of Mark Spector is trying to wear him down, trying to convince him that he cannot overcome Khonshu, that Khonshu is just way more powerful than he is. The other part of it is that ANAD, working alongside Khonshu, is trying to basically prepare Mark's body to become a host for Khonshu himself, right? And so again, what goes on here is quite literally Mark Spector breaks free from his confinement and then just knocks out ANAD. And then in doing that, finally goes and confronts Khonshu, right? Again, this is where Khonshu's messing with his mind, where he's kind of changing things around as far as Mark goes. Keep in mind, this whole story is happening in his head. There's nothing here in this story that's really going on in the real world. And so once he comes face to face with Khonshu and meets with him, that he says, like, we're not just going to beat you, Khonshu, we're going to break you. And the response of Khonshu is, I mean, you could, but like your mind's so already broken. Like literally everything you know is my weapon, Mark. Like everything that you believe, it's my tool to use. You believe that we're here in New York. No, we're not. We're on the moon. And you think I'm Khonshu? No, I'm Jack Russell. I'm Werewolf by night. And of course, Mark fighting against these things is like, no, none of this is real. This is not real. There even comes a point where Khonshu manifests Raoul Bushman, the mortal enemy of Mark Spector, and even to a degree, he's somewhat fierce. But like overcoming Raoul Bushman and then like Parker Robbins the Hood and like Jack Russell coming back and like all these different villains, this is Mark realizing, no, none of this is real. This is you, Khonshu, and it was always you. These are just illusions that you're creating in an illusory mind, right? Like, yes, my mind is broken. Yes, I have these personalities, but it doesn't mean that I can't have a life, Khonshu. And it doesn't mean that my personalities and I can't find some way to mingle, to coexist. Over the course of my life, I've ignored them. I have blown them off. I have treated them like they're not there. But one way or another, they are going to manifest. But if we can coexist in some measure of harmony, then at that point, my life is my own, right? I use them when I need them, right? I bring out the Moon Knight personality when I have to beat somebody up in the middle of the night. I bring out the Steve Grant personality when I need to know what's going on in the world. And when Steve Grant has to present himself to whatever environment he's in. And I can bring out the Jake Lockley persona when I need to keep my ear to the ground on crime. They are not, I mean, sure, they're personalities. They have thoughts, feelings, things like that, but they are a part of me. And if they are a part of me, they are just like my heart and my arms and my legs. They serve a purpose. They are something to be used to achieve a particular goal. He doesn't come across that perspective in the sense that he's like, they are worthless, they only serve some limited purpose. It's simply him saying, We are simply a cohesive unit. And he says, I am sick, right? I know that. I will never be cured. This is always going to be who I am. And he says, but I can still live. I can still have a life, and I won't let you ruin that for me anymore. And that where Khonshu begs, right? This is literally Mark Spector overcoming that part of himself, right? That kind of self-doubt, right? That lack of confidence, his subconscious, right? If that's really what Khonshu represents, it's him overcoming that and saying, no, Khonshu, I am Mark Spector, I am Stephen Grant, I am Jake Lockley, and we are going to be okay. We are going to live with who we are. We are Moon Knight, and we never needed you. And in doing that, totally destroys Khonshu, right? Like kills him. And so one of the things to know is this is Khonshu's impact on Mark Spector's mind. I mean, Khonshu is a literal Egyptian god, so Mark Spector doesn't quite have the power to destroy him. Even when Mark Spector had the Phoenix Force in the more recent Avengers run, all he could do was defeat Khonshu, and then Khonshu was locked away in an Asgardian cell. So that's really where he resides. But at the moment, Mark Spector now has some measure of inner peace. And what this does is it allows him to go forward essentially as Mr. Knight. So for those of you guys who are currently following our videos on Jed McKay's Moon Knight run, which you'll also find in the description of this video or a card or something like that in the video itself, this segues directly into that. I mean, there's a few things that happen in between, right? In terms of like his solo series, it goes from this to Jed McKay. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.